What's up, guys? You're watching Carvel, and this is all you need to get started with gears. There are a variety of gears, but this video is mostly about spur gears, but more on that later. A gear is a disc-like part of a machine with extrusions called teeth. The teeth of one gear meshes with the teeth of another to transmit rotational motion. Here, we can see a train of gears. Inspecting closer, with the gears mesh, we can say that the tooth of the input gear pushes a tooth of the output gear with force F. Firstly, the tooth of the input gear, highlighted green, pushes on the tooth of the output gear, highlighted yellow. After the gears rotate a particular angle, the highlighted gears do not have contact with each other anymore. Now, the tooth just above the highlighted tooth in the input gear pushes the tooth just above the highlighted tooth in the output gear. This again makes the gears to rotate a particular angle. This process repeats itself several times in order to make the gears rotate. Every gear is denoted by the number of teeth it has. For example, the gear on the top has 20 teeth, hence the 20 tooth gear. The gear below it has 16 teeth, hence the 16 tooth gear. The gear on the bottom, it has 8 teeth, hence the 8 tooth gear. A fundamental property of gears is that the direction of rotation alternates throughout the gear train. That is, if one gear rotates in the clockwise direction, the gear that it is driving rotates in the anti-clockwise direction, and vice versa. This trait can be seen in long gear trains as well. Here, we see a gear train consisting of 3 gears. If the first gear spins in the clockwise direction, the second gear in the counterclockwise direction, and the third gear in the clockwise direction again. Now, before we dive any deeper into the concept of gears, we must have a basic understanding of what torque is. So, what is torque? Torque can be basically defined as the force that causes rotation. Have you ever wondered why the doorknob is to the far side of the door and not near the hinge? Well, say you are applying a force at the doorknob. The door opens pretty easily. Now say you are applying the same force at half the distance from the hinge. Well, now it's significantly tougher. Try it yourself. For that, we must know how to find the torque of a system. So, torque can be formulated as the product of the force applied and the distance between the force and the axis. In the first case, let's say we apply a force of 10 Newton at 0.5 meters from the hinge, making the torque 5 Newton meter, making it pretty easy to open the door. But in the second case, we apply the same amount of force but now at half the distance, so the torque now is 2.5 Newton meters, making it significantly tougher to open the door. In this gear train, let's say that the gear on the left is the driving gear and the gear on the right is the driven gear. So the driving gear applies a force F at the driven gear, which is the same force that the driven gear outputs. The only difference being the radius of the driven gear is much larger. But if we switch the positions of the gears, making the bigger gear rotate the smaller gear, here the bigger gear applies the same force on the smaller gear, which is outputted by it. But the difference here is that the radius is much smaller as compared to the radius in the previous case. So in the first case, R is greater, hence a smaller torque. In the second case, R is smaller, hence a greater torque. Here we see 2 gears meshing with each other. Let's say the gear to the left is the input gear and the gear to the right is the output gear. With these black bars as reference, let's count how many times the output gear spins every time the input gear spins once. The output gear spins twice every time the input gear spins once. Now, changing the order of the gears, let's count again. Now, the input gear spins twice in order for the output gear to spin once. What is happening? In the first case, a gear with 16 teeth drives a gear with 8 teeth. The ratio of the teeth of the output gear and the input gear, that is, the number of teeth of the output gear divided by the number of teeth of the input gear, gives us a value 2. This number denotes how faster the output gear spins compared to the input gear. But in the second case, a gear with 8 teeth drives a gear with 16 teeth. The ratio of these gears gives us a value 0.5. This denotes that every time the input gear spins once, that is 360 degrees, the output gear spins only half a rotation, that is 180 degrees. With the knowledge that we gained on torque and the variance of speeds of gears, we can formulate a relation of the force and speed of gears. When we gear up, that is, if a larger gear rotates a smaller one, the speed increases, but the torque of the gear reduces. But when we gear down, that is, a smaller gear driving a larger one, the speed decreases, but there is an increase in the torque. We can see this concept in action in a car. In a muddy or a rocky, uneven terrain, we gear down. This reduces the speed but increases the torque, allowing the car to move. But on a clear highway, where a large torque is not much important, we gear up. This increases the speed of the car.